Chapter 1. A Question of Succession. The Queen of France was only 18, but this would be her third child. Tears poured down her smooth cheeks as she panted and screamed in her luxurious bedchamber, attended by a pale-faced midwife and a band of panicking female servants. Queen Jeanne d'Evreux ignored them, gritting her teeth over the wave of agony that came with another contraction. Hope and fear clashed in her heart as the young queen strained to bring her child into the world. Jeanne had been through so much even at her age. Married to King Charles IV at the tender age of 14, she had already lost her first baby and just 2 months ago her husband. Now she knew the fate of the entire kingdom was waiting in this room, hinged on the gender of the baby that she was about to deliver. Jeanne had given Charles 2 children before he died. The first, named after her mother, had only lived a few months. The second was strong and healthy so far, but also a daughter. Now Charles was dead and left behind neither brothers nor sons. If the French crown was to remain in the hands of the House of Capet, this baby had to be a boy. Otherwise, there were 2 claimants to the throne. One was Charles IV's first cousin, Philip of Valois, who was already serving as regent, and the other was Edward III, the King of England. France could not fall into his hands. Finally, relief. Jeanne fell back onto her pillows, sweat soaking the sheets as the midwife lifted the baby. There was a beat of silence that made Jeanne's heart freeze. Then a thin cry rose into the air, filling the chamber with the sound of a new life. Exhausted and awash with pain, Jeanne still managed to ask the baby's gender. The midwife looked at her with wide eyes, knowing full well the importance of the question, but there was no denying the truth. Jeanne had given birth to another baby girl. Charles IV had no heir. It was 1328, and France and England had been chafing at one another for centuries. Ever since William the Conqueror had landed at Hastings and destroyed the English king in 1066, sparking the medieval era and infusing English royalty with French blood, the 2 great kingdoms had been butting heads. The most recent struggle had been the brief War of Saint-Sardo, when Charles IV and King Edward II of England had struggled for control over a small province on the west coast of France named Gascony. William the Conqueror, who became the first medieval king of England, had been Duke of Normandy. Through his lineage, the King of England continued to have territories in France, and although France gradually won back most of its land, Gascony remained under the control of the English king. This meant that the King of England owed homage to the King of France. Homage was a symbolic ritual in which a person who owned land in a region presided over by a higher-ranking person would pledge allegiance and submission to their lord. In this case, the King of England was also Duke of Aquitaine, including Gascony, and he thus had to pay homage to the King of France. This did not sit at all well with any of the English kings, and multiple attempts were made to seize Gascony entirely from France. Philip VI's father, Charles of Valois, had recently defeated English King Edward II in a struggle over Gascony. It was supposed to be a gesture of peace when Charles IV's sister Isabella of France married Edward II. Instead, it would spark the longest-lasting European conflict in history. Ancient Salic law, which had been adopted by the French courts, prevented women from inheriting titles. For this reason, Jeanne's 2 daughters, Marie and the newborn Blanche, were ineligible for Charles IV's title. Instead, Charles IV's paternal first cousin, Philip VI, was crowned King of France. However, England was about to throw a wrench in the works once again. Isabella of France was more successful in producing heirs than Queen Jeanne had been. By the time Charles IV died, Isabella's son Edward III was King of England. As Charles IV's nephew, he was the deceased king's closest male relative and technically could lay a claim to the throne, which he briskly did when Philip VI was crowned. The French court, however, argued that since Isabella had no right to the throne, she couldn't pass that same right on to Edward.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.